Today, I'm going to answer your questions in a Q&A session. The other day I put up a post on Instagram and asked you for your questions, things that you'd like answered about the sport of F1 and what I do. And I had 68 responses, and I think I've got about 45 odd questions here that I'm going to answer, kicking off with this one. What made you want to get into photographing at F1 races? Well, I'll tell you exactly what it was. I went along to the 2016 Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi. I went along as a paying guest of Red Bull in their corporate suite, and I got to go down in the paddock and enjoy all that sort of stuff, and in the garage. And I remember at the back of the garage, right over here I think it is an area where we could stand with headphones on and listen to the driver talk to the engineer. I remember it was Daniel talking to his engineer. It was very quiet except for this little conversation, and at that moment I got a bit tingly and thought, this is great, I'd love to be a part of this sport. So that's what set me off on my path to becoming an F1 photographer. What's the best Grand Prix to take pictures at? Well, I answered this to a certain degree in a video I did recently, and I said Monaco was one of my top 3 or 4. It's very hard to say which is the single best one, but I really love Monaco. I love it for the glamour, the glitz, the photographic options that are open to us, the backgrounds, just the whole package, and it's nice and tight too. It's not a long circuit where it takes you forever to get from one end to the other. So that's probably the one I would say. If I had to pick one, I'd say this one by a small margin. Is it difficult to catch the cars in motion with how fast they're going? Technically no, like this shot here is taken at 4,000ths of a second. Anyone can take that photo because there's no great skill in it. Point the camera at the cars, you know that at some point it's going to come into focus, you press the shutter button, and because you're shooting at a 4,000th of a second, you're going to get a sharp shot. This, on the other hand, is a very hard shot to get because I'm shooting at 1/15th of a second. And this is where the real skill, and the guys that are great have been doing this for 20 years, can nail this. I don't know, 1 in 5 shots might be sharp, and I might be 1 in 50, 1 in 30, who knows. But that is the real skill in capturing a car when you're using a slow shutter speed and you have to pan with the car. How did you first start out photographing at F1 races and building relationships with drivers? How did I first start out? I just went along and took photos. I really was quite clueless in that sort of respect. Building relationships, that takes a lot of time. And it certainly didn't come, I don't think, in the first half of the first year. I might have started to develop some relationships in the second half. But it's only once I've been here in my 3rd year that I can, obviously, they're not really friendships, because in the paddock you only get to speak to these people for maybe a minute, a couple of minutes is a long conversation. And I've socialised outside with a couple of them, but yes, you have to put in a lot of time. Which is the best corner to shoot in F1? Well, I quite like the exit of the tunnel in Monaco, where you get that lovely black behind the car. I shoot low through the Armco and the car comes out into light. And really, I'm not sure that there's too many better shots that I can get than that. But the other corner I love is this one. It's Eau Rouge. Down on the right here, we get to stand in this little area, and they come ripping down here at 200 or 300, probably closer to 300 k's an hour, and they head up the hill. Now, when we stand there, and this cameraman stands there for the whole of the 4 days, he's a real trooper, I reckon. They come past at such a horrendous speed. Let me just go and flick that back over there for you. And you've got to be very good to get a shot there because they're hurtling past. But more so, it's the bravado involved in standing there because they push a fair bit of air. You feel that, it's noisy, and it's really not the noise that comes from the engine. It's the noise of the tyres going over this curbing, this rumble strip here, that is louder actually than the engine. And the other corner that I quite love is in Monaco, at exit of swimming pool, where you have this fence here that is 2 sections of Armco high, not very high at all, and we get so close to the action. And if I had to throw in another one, I'd probably say the castle, well actually it's not really a castle, it's a wall, at Azerbaijan in Baku. I love the backdrop and what that offers. If you were not shooting F1, what other category of motorsports would you shoot? I wouldn't shoot any. I really only have a love of F1. And I think to shoot anything else is probably to take it down a notch, and I'm happy just to focus on this one particular form of motorsport. What kind of details do you focus on most when taking a picture? The background. And it has been drummed into me by some very good photographers. This is a nice background because there's nothing there. It's nice and clean, and you get Charles kicking up a whole lot of dust. This is a shit background. And I must admit, and I think probably all photographers would be the same, that when you first get involved in the sport, you'll go out and take photos here because you think, oh, well, the car looks okay in the shot. But it was drummed into me very early on that I have to stop putting crap in the background of my photos. No toilets, no cranes, no mishmash of rubbish that's evident there. What's my favourite livery to photograph and why? I love Ferraris. I think they look great. They're a vivid colour. And the other one that I don't like is the back of the Mercedes. When you're shooting a rear shot, it's just a blob of nothing. And I often, when I see a Mercedes come around the corner, unless they're getting way off the track, like this case of Lewis here in China, I don't even push the shutter. It's just not worth it. Do you work photographing other stuff apart from the F1? Yes, I do. In fact, before I got into Formula One, I'd spent 2.5 years, no, I beg your pardon, I'd spent 26 weeks in Africa, over 2.5 years, shooting wildlife. And I had the time of my life. My wife came along, and between the two of us, we produced this book, Africa on Safari. And it was released in 2015, and I'll whack that down there. And then very shortly thereafter, a German version was produced by National Geographic. They picked up the rights for a German language version. As you can see, different cover. But that is Africa on Safari. It is available on my website at kymillman.com, and it's a beautiful book. When I'm not doing Africa stuff, and I haven't done that obviously since I've started F1, I have a holiday home in a town called Lancelin, and it's a beach town. It's actually a crayfishing / lobster town. And I tend to love photographing that, and out the back are some of the most magnificent sand dunes you'll ever see. And I'll often go out there and sometimes photograph beautiful women in bizarre outfits like this. So yeah, I have a wide range of interests, and occasionally I'll do some controversial stuff like this model in a meat fridge, and that gets people excited as well. So I tend to like that sort of stuff. Has your job disadvantages? Yes. You're away from home quite a long time, can be a little bit lonely from time to time, but I'm not complaining, and there's certainly minimal disadvantages compared with the excitement of photographing what is a world sport. How did your body handle travelling so much, adjusting to different time zones and being on your feet for 4 days at each race? Well, on the time zone thing, never have a problem going away. I almost always arrive into wherever I'm going on a Wednesday, and by Thursday I'm fine. Might be a little bit tired at the end of the day. My real problem is coming back to Australia, and I tend to suffer a bit more with jet lag on the way back. And the other bit was on my feet for 4 days. It's great. It's great exercise, and I tend not to be at the fridge all the time, so I perhaps lose weight when I'm away walking 10 to 15, sometimes 20 Ks a day, and not eating 24/7. What's my favourite picture? Very hard to pick your favourite picture. It's like picking your favourite kid. But if I had to pick two, I'd go with this one. Daniel Ricciardo, Hockenheim this year, wet weather tyres, spray coming up, me standing right in the middle of the track. It's the picture that's sold most at prostarpics.com. And I'll get 5 and 6 orders a week for this particular picture for people to blow up and put on their wall, or even to get Daniel to sign. So that's my favourite shot of this year. And probably one of my best shots ever was the very first race that I shot in Melbourne in 2017. This shot of Max Verstappen locking up and sparking at the same time. Do I have a perfect photo in my head that you wish to take at an F1 race? Yeah, I probably do. And I would hark back to this one, and I would shoot it at a lower shutter speed so you had a bit more blur and a bit more water being flicked up. But apart from that, I can't think of another shot that I've got in my head. Most charismatic driver. I'd have to say this guy. He's just so much fun. He's always smiling. He's a real character. Occasionally pulls funny faces. So Daniel is my go-to man for that. How much is gossiping present in the paddock? Yeah, I hear a bit of it. And I might have got caught recently with something that someone told me about Nico Hulkenberg and went a bit too early with that on my Instagram page. But yeah, people talk, and you've got to think, because you're close to it, you're going to perhaps hear things a little bit earlier than the general public. Not that I go looking for that. Who do you find easiest and most challenging driver and team principal to shoot? Well, I think he's the easiest driver because I know him reasonably well. I always get a smile from Pierre. He doesn't go out of his way to avoid me. The hardest one, without a doubt, is Lewis because he's so rarely visible, and when he is visible, he moves about quickly on that scooter, and he's quite protective of his image, I think. In terms of team principals, the easiest to shoot for me is probably Franz Tost. Always smiles at me, likeable man, and there's no one that's hard to shoot. What lens do you use for portraits, and do you use ND filters often? Portraits, I love the 85mm fixed from Canon. Beautiful lens, bit heavy, bit slow on the focus, but in terms of its quality, beautiful. And if it's in sunny conditions and you put a polarizer on, even better. Do I use ND filters? Occasionally. I remember having to use an ND filter to do a bizarre shot I was trying where I needed to leave the shutter open for about nearly a second. It was at turn 1 in the Melbourne race, and I had to use an ND filter on a big lens. But I can't say I use them that often. Any interest in being hired by a team to shoot exclusively for them? Yes, there is interest in that. It does get you unequalled access to the garage and drivers, but on the other hand, it then takes you away from the general run of things, and I think my pictures would be mainly focused on whoever that team was. So there are pros and cons. What do you do when the season ends? Well, I go back to Perth, Australia, where I have a business called Messages on Hold that has 60 staff. And a lot of people say, what is Messages on Hold? Well, it's the audio you listen to when you're placed on hold. So we do the audio productions for about 10,000 sites around Asia Pacific. And every time you get placed on hold at those businesses, you'll hear some advertising. So that's what keeps me busy there. And I also spend a lot of time in Lancelin. Are there any types of areas you just don't like to take photos of or from? Yeah, I don't like to go out to the far reaches of the track. Primarily because that cuts into my time shooting in the paddock. And the reason I say that is because sometimes we have to get a bus out and you have to leave 30 or 45 minutes before the session starts, and that's wasted time. You can't edit while you're out there, you can't shoot photos while you're out there, and then to get back, you're probably going to have to wait till the track closes, and that's another 15 to 20 minutes of wasted time. How difficult do you think it is working in an international sport like F1 and coming from Australia? Very difficult, and you tend to lose a lot of time travelling, whereas my European counterparts have it easy for most of the races, especially those Euro races where they might take a 2-hour flight. I've got to take probably a 20-hour flight. So there is that drawback. What are the challenges you face in the wet races? Right, keeping your gear dry. And typically I have wet weather gear for me and my cameras, but if I put a 600mm lens on and I put my wet weather gear on that and a wet weather cover on a 70 to 200, I'm loath to change those lenses because A, it's a pain in the bum, and B, because I really don't have gear that will protect, say, a shorter lens. So I tend to get shots mainly from 2 cameras, and of course there's the discomfort involved and having to lug that sort of stuff around. Then when you get back to the media centre, you're sopping wet, and I do laugh from time to time. All of the photographers have all of their wet weather kit slung over the rails, and it becomes, looks like a washing room. Are the drivers receptive to continually having photographers in their face? Do you pay for the Paddock Club at each race? So 2 questions there. The drivers are fine with the photography side of things as a rule. I think I've only ever been asked not to take photos, and that was by a driver out the back of the FIA garage after they'd had an ordinary race and they thought I'd just had enough pictures, and I just said yep and moved away. But more so, it's the TV cameras I think they have issues with, and a couple of times I've heard drivers say, do you really need to be that close? Because they will stand maybe 50 centimetres from the driver and walk backwards with them for sometimes 50 to 100 metres. And of course the driver has to act like there is not some cameraman standing 50 centimetres from him for quite a long time. What was the other bit? Do you pay? No, you don't pay for Paddock Club. In fact, you can't We can't even go into Paddock Club because of the fact that that's upstairs, that's food and booze, and they're high-ticket items. We get entrance to the paddock, but that's not Paddock Club, and no, there is no charge for that. How should I, as an aspiring photographer, cinematographer, begin? What gear should I start with? As a photographer, how should you begin? Look, I'm not sure I can answer that accurately. I know a lot of the guys have started in the lower rungs of motorsport, worked their way up, and I think mainly to get into this sport you need connections, because I imagine that there are a million photographers out there all at the same level. It's very much a case of who you know, not what you know. And as regard to what gear you should start with, I would go with a 70 to 200mm lens, and I would go with a camera that shoots the highest possible number of shots per second that you can afford. Who's the most popular driver when you post? It'll be one of these three: Lando, Charles, or Daniel. And I'm not sure why. Daniel, probably because I'm Australian and I tended to focus on him in the early start and build an audience there. But certainly with Charles and Lando, they are very popular, and being up-and-comers and having good personalities, colourful characters, doesn't do them any harm. How do you take such nice pictures of cars? Well, they aren't always nice, and they weren't always nice. Certainly when I first started, I struggled like every other photographer, but I've been lucky to have some very good people who critique my work, and as much as I think I'm doing okay, it's always nice when someone like a Mark Thompson from Getty Images, who's almost like the godfather of F1, or Mark Sutton, who's been at for over 2 decades, when they look at your images, you get honest feedback because they've shot so many images. So in answer to your question, how do you get there? You just keep pressing the button and improving on what you're doing and not accepting second best. How tough is it to photograph at a street circuit? Isn't the space limited? Yeah, look, it is tough, and I don't like things like Melbourne where you've got this wire either side of the track. So you have to use some tricks to make the wire not so obvious. And it might be having the car closer and shooting at a wider lens so that the car becomes the focus of the shot. And sure, there's wire, but it's not right in your face. Or you tend to shoot from overhead. That's another option. Or you shoot at a slower shutter speed and blur the background so it's not as distracting. Were you nervous when you first took a shot of a famous person you like or with them? No, not nervous, just took their photo. How do pilots behave among themselves when no camera around? Converse, abuse. Well, I've got to say that I'm almost always carrying 2 cameras, so perhaps I'm not the right person to ask about that. But look, I've seen them in times when they're heading to the driver's briefing, when they're relaxed, and you do get to enjoy some great relations that they're having with their mates and that sort of stuff. I've also seen some angst here. I remember this particular incident a few races ago where Roman and his press officer Stuart were having a bit of a disagreement out the back of the FIA garage. Nothing too savage, but it was honest and it was in front of me, and I got to shoot it. Now, had there have been 30 photographers around, I don't know whether that would have happened, but I was the only one there, and they were just behaving naturally as you'd expect. What sort of relations do you have with the drivers? Some I know well, some I don't know well, some I've never talked to. Just depends. I've spoken to Daniel a number of times, obviously, and Charles I know, Nico, Lando, and a few of them. So yeah, it's nice when they know you by name, and they tend to give you a better photo opportunity. In particular, Nico is great with the way he plays up to me, because he knows that he'll probably get to see those images, and he knows me. Standing so close to the action, have you ever felt in danger? Once. I think it was this instance here. It was in Japan. It was the spoon curve, I think that's what it's called, down the back of the track. And the cars come around the corner and they head down here, and this is a wider shot. Now we stand just down here, just out of shot, and they come here. Now Valtteri was heading down here at a fair clip, and he got quite messy, and I just was standing at the lower rung here, not here, but just a bit further back, and I saw him coming towards me, and I thought, oh, he's not going to save this, so I've just dived for cover. And that was the only time I really felt threatened. It turns out he didn't hit me, but a little further on, he hit the fence up there, and that put him out of action in that session. How many photos do you take on average each weekend? About 16,000. Now remember, there are 4 days of an event. There's probably 7 hours that we're photographing for. And every time we press the shutter button, it's taking 2 or 3 pictures minimum, because I shoot in high speed. So when I'm taking shots out in the track, I might be shooting 5 frames every time. And you multiply that by the number of times a car comes around, plus all the shots in the paddock. It tends to be a lot. And then we have to go through, pick the good ones out, edit them all, and post them on prostarpics.com and kymillman.com. So there you go, some questions asked and answered for you. Thank you for sending in those questions if you were one of those people. Remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on YouTube videos in the future. Your comments are always appreciated. You can own any of my images by heading to prostarpics.com. My blogs and podcasts are at kymillman.com, and you'll get pictures live from the track and during the week on my Instagram account at Kym Illman. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate.